on the topic of broadband strategic planning. So Todd, take the lead from here.
Thank you, Mayor. As one of the council's goals, it was the investigation of broadband service to the city was discussed during the budget process. It's been on the table for the last couple of years. So we've set up an internal team led by Wayne Olson, Martine Alvarez, and Andy Firestein to work with us in terms of presenting some options to the council on a path forward, which will likely involve a master plan being put together to provide you some options on how we might attack broadband in Palm Desert if the council still wants to head that direction. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Martine to introduce Mr. Scott, who we've brought in. He knows more about broadband than any of us on the call, so we thought it would be a great resource to talk the council through some of your options.
Well, thanks, Todd. I appreciate the intro. It's perfect segue into our topic about broadband strategy. As we've learned over not only just the last year, but even before that, that connectivity is important for the city. It's important for us to diversify and attract new businesses. We've engaged with Tim Scott, who's on the call. He is an expert in broadband. He's been in the industry for 20 years. He's assisted numerous public entities across the nation in also developing strategy for broadband and also implementing broadband strategies. And so we're happy to have him on board. Today's presentation will be a collaboration between myself, Tim, Wayne, and some of the other staff members that have been involved in at least putting together this presentation. But without further ado, we'll kick off, and then we'll talk a little bit about the agenda for today. And then what I'd like to do is really focus in on the presentation. If I could ask the council to jot down their questions, and let us get through, if you don't mind, through the presentation. I think a lot of the questions that could be asked will be answered as we go through the presentation. This is a very deep and detailed subject, and I know there will be a lot of questions, but if we could get through the presentation in 20, 30 minutes, and then we can open it up really to have a really engaged conversation about this subject. So if that's okay, Mayor, I'm looking to you to ensure that that's okay. I see the head nod, so thank you. What we're wanting to do today is you really kind of bring everybody up to speed on broadband, right? And this topic has been around for a long time. It's really an important topic when we talk about the future and what goals can be achieved with connectivity. So Tim's going to lead us through understanding connectivity. What are its pros and cons, and what's out there in the market. Bring us up to speed on the current broadband environment across the nation and the world. And then we're going to dive into a case study, which we believe is a really unique opportunity that Centennial did, and how they approached their broadband planning and how they've implemented at this point their strategy. And then I'll come in and talk about Palm Desert's opportunities and some of the other recommendations that are available for us. And of course, we'll open it up to discussion for the entire council to dive into this subject. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Tim. And Tim, if you could take it away.
Thanks, Martine. Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. Hopefully everybody can hear me clearly. Yep, great. Okay, next slide, please, and we will get started. Appreciate you making yourselves available today. Okay, there we go. So we're going to jump into the world of broadband, and the feedback that I want to give here initially is pretty straightforward in the sense that Palm Desert is very typical of any other sort of mid-sized city in America, where you typically have a coaxial or cable company that serves your city, and you also have a phone company, in this case Frontier, that provides what's called DSL, or using the copper technologies that are deployed there. This is what I'll often refer to as the status quo. This is what most cities in America have. This is the so-called, telecommunications competition. A little bit of a cozy duopoly, you might hear that word too, but that's what everybody has. I do want to touch a little bit on a couple of new things down here, which are pretty important. So you've probably seen all the ads on television about 5G and how it's coming to a city near you soon. And that's kind of true. If you're an NFL city, maybe in the near future, Palm Desert, maybe not so much. But 5G is new. The important thing to remember is it's a mobile technology, so it's provided by the mobile carriers, and it's clearly not a technology that's designed to improve home or business broadband, and that's a big distinction. With 5G, yeah, hopefully in the future you can walk down Main Street USA and have really good services, or go to the park and have really good services and download a movie in a minute and stuff like that, and that'll be great. But it's not going to fundamentally change your service at home. You may live in a neighborhood that has a little bit of service, but your neighbor across the street may not. It's not designed to provide home or business services. The other key point about 5G is it is all fiber powered. Although that is a wireless technology, as it goes to your phone or your iPad or your device, the fiber is going to the micro cell that's sending that signal. That's an important distinction. And then the last piece here, just at the bottom, is, you've probably seen, and even in California, we now have municipalities and local governments trying to figure out how to bring fiber to their communities. Fiber is new. It's a new infrastructure as we know it within a community, but it's not as it relates to, the international market. And we'll talk about that. And the key difference with fiber is it's a very high capacity, very high bandwidth service. So you'll see over here in the right, the sort of range of speeds that you can get. Think of fiber as essentially an unlimited technology. That's essentially what fiber is. It's put into packages that we buy and consume, such as gigabit technologies, but essentially the fundamental technology itself is an unlimited capacity. So those is a very quick view of the broadband market and what we have today and what's available in most sort of mid-sized American cities, including Palm Desert. Next slide, please. So as I'd said earlier, what is this current environment? So the reason we have this cozy monopoly or duopoly is, we've all sort of accepted this. And I always think it's ironic when we look at the competition we have for broadband to our house, and then we look at the competition we have on our mobile handsets. We all walk around with a pretty cool mobile phone. We all have choice of competition. We all have cool new devices. And that's because we have real competition. And unfortunately, as it relates to, wireline market, what goes to homes and what goes to businesses, we tend to have this very hands-off approach where we've had this sort of monopoly or cozy duopoly develop in most markets. Certainly, there are very few markets where you have proactive investment in fiber to the home. Normally, one of the reasons for that is, it is very expensive because it's a new infrastructure. So if you're the incumbent and you've already got cable plant or you've already got copper plant, your drive is going to be to maximize the return on that investment that you've already made. There's very few carriers out there that have said, we're going to, ignore all our coaxial cable plant and build fiber that's new infrastructure to homes and businesses that we serve. What you've seen governments work together with private sector companies to bring fiber to the home, for instance, under, sort of public-private partnership type models, but very few cases where, a carrier will, spend billions of dollars and say, I'm going to go out and invest in this new infrastructure and bring fiber to the home or to businesses as an example. Next slide, please. So public participation, why should the public sector enter the market? So this lack of competition is really giving us what I would call poor outcomes. Pretty much all cities have very little control of broadband availability in their cities in terms of both where it's present, in terms of the speeds, the packages, the outcomes, really very, very little control at all. And obviously what that means is that the third point here is, from an economic development perspective, which is one of the tools by which fiber and broadband can be leveraged, if you're not, so to speak, in the game and able to influence the fiber and broadband market in your city, it's very difficult to influence any of the economic development outcomes. So I've seen many cities, many local governments understand the power of broadband, understand the power, how fiber as infrastructure can power broadband solutions that have a direct positive impact on economic development. I want to state really clearly, I don't believe it's the only tool in the toolkit by any means, but it's another tool in the toolkit from an economic development perspective to be able to both attract new businesses to your city or your region and also retain the ones that already made decisions to be there. So the last point, really it's a decision point for the city to make, is to have an active role in both planning and implementing a broadband strategy that can have significant influence in broadband outcomes within your jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So why fiber? It's funny, we don't talk about fiber, and it's funny, like the 5G example that I just gave. The only reason that 5G is ultimately such a great broadband technology, as I said, is the fact that it's fiber that's actually going to those microcell towers that are turning that into that wireless technology. So it's an essential infrastructure for the 21st century, right across America, right across our cities. It's really the plumbing of the future. As I said earlier, it's pretty much a limitless capacity, apart from the electronics that sort of turn the light into bits and bytes that we consume. I think what's really interesting is the fiber investments across America have already been made. Like internationally, all the data traffic that goes around the world, that goes across our country, goes across fiber infrastructure. We just haven't figured out how to do it locally yet. And a lot of the reason for that ultimately comes back to the lack of competition. So a lack of competition exists. A broadband strategy is key for forward-looking cities and local governments to focus on those economic development goals and better outcomes as it relates to broadband for their residents. Next slide, please. Okay, I wanted to talk about a case study that I think is very relevant for perhaps where Palm Desert is. The city of Centennial. It's sort of 20 miles perhaps outside Denver, a large metro region, population of about 100,000 people. And we want to talk a little bit about their case study and why they just decided to enter into the game to change their broadband outcomes. And the next slide, please. A big part of why they decided to make that decision comes back to this slide. Now, I know this is a lot of information here, but basically what you have to think of here is, so where is Palm Desert today? You're at the bottom of this curve. You're not really spending any dollars on investment as it relates to broadband. And ultimately, if you look along the x-axis here, that means you have very little influence or benefit coming as a result of that. Here is ultimately the decision that various cities make about how much they want to participate in changing those broadband outcomes. And I've deliberately used a couple of Californian communities that I'm familiar with. I've shown here where Centennial, Colorado is, which we're going to talk about in a second. And the starting point for Palm Desert is back here, where basically you try to influence public policy if you can. And then you can see here the range of investments that different cities have made and how those investments change the amount of control and community benefit. So right up here, Ontario, has spent an awful lot of money investing in their infrastructure, and they're very much in the business, and they're actually even a retail provider offering internet services to their residents. And that changes, as we go down here to Rancho Cucamonga, down to Centennial, which we'll talk about. And there's, various examples of all these that I could provide, but ultimately it's a risk and reward trade-off that cities need to consider. Next slide, please. So Centennial, as I talked about, they invested about $5.8 million, and they created this infrastructure, which I know looks very simplistic here, but this is a good slide. It'll hopefully lead to some good discussions. They created essentially this racetrack. And this racetrack is basically, think of it as their fiber interstate system that goes around the city of Centennial. And they spent $5.8 million. They built this all underground fiber infrastructure system. And then they decided how they were going to best leverage that infrastructure within their city to impact and change some of their outcomes. So for instance, they made decisions to directly connect their public works buildings onto fiber, the other buildings that were in the cities. We worked very closely with the schools and the library boards, and we have several of the school districts that are participating in getting fiber to their school districts, and obviously worked very closely with public safety institutions. Traffic signaling was actually a big part of that project too, and that's indicated here. There's one very small little piece that I just want to talk about, and why this is a dashed line here at neighborhoods and a dashed line here at businesses. So the city made the decision to invest in the orange lines, which brought fiber out close to those neighborhoods and brought fiber out close to those businesses. But then it really tested the private sector market and did basically like a procurement outreach and asked what private sector companies would leverage this backbone infrastructure, this racetrack essentially that they invested in their city, to offer fiber to the home and compelling broadband services to homes and to businesses within the city of Centennial. And I think it's a great model. It's sort of been known as the, people often ask me, talk to me about that Centennial infrastructure model. And this is essentially what it is. It's what we call a dark fiber infrastructure model. It's about 55 miles of dark fiber backbone that were built around the city. And then the city made these strategic investments to extend that backbone where it made sense for the city to do it, and basically had like an invisible line where it wanted to engage and work, see what the private sector could do, which was ultimately this focus on businesses and residents. So I'm sort of, I guess, suggesting a similar approach for Palm Desert, and we'll look at some of the reasons why I think a similar approach makes some sense with CVAG in the next couple of slides. So next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of a context, that racetrack is essentially this that you're looking at. This is the 3 loops that we built. So basically we have what we call an east ring there in purple, which is on the east side of the city. We have a more complex sort of downtown or central business district ring, which is in green, including the connections to our city buildings and the civic center buildings. And then we have a larger west ring, which really goes out and again goes down the backbone, the main streets of all the residential neighborhoods. But you can even tell by looking at this that these are, residential areas, and that investment into the residential areas and those service providers, or those services, that consumers consume at homes in the red area, for instance, are all delivered by the private sector. We had a new market entrant who's come into the city, and they've spent about $20 million already investing in creating fiber to the home, which happens to be predominantly more so in this red area of the city that we're looking at the moment. Next slide, please. Okay, I said a lot very quickly. I'm going to pause right here, and I think I'm passing it over to Martine, and hopefully we can get to some questions when Martine finishes. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tim. That was a lot of important and detailed information. So where we're at today is that, we have opportunities. We've talked about this internally with the staff, of course, with the city council as a predominant goal for the city to not only enhance connectivity for the residents, but also provide opportunities for us to hopefully attract new industries in Palm Desert, which is what we're ultimately trying to achieve from an economic development standpoint. So next slide, we can move forward. We've talked about how this is an essential infrastructure, the streets, streets, curbs, gutters that allow for us to transport around the city. It also attracts, if you look at roads, right, it attracts investment in terms of, if you think of residential districts out there, if there's access, availability, and ease of access, it attracts development in the city. So this is really what we're looking at, is a critical infrastructure for the future. Again, going back to the economic development plan, this is a goal that we've had in mind for a long time. We've invested, and I say we, the city, has invested quite a bit in providing the Palm Desert IHub, investing in the Cal State San Bernardino Palm Desert campus. These are all tools, right, to attract new businesses and workforces. But this is yet another tool that we have an opportunity to move forward. It's certainly, specifically right now, there's an opportunity that we can move forward to very quickly. And I think that the next couple of slides will talk to those as well. So go ahead, next slide, please. So if we're looking at a plan, we're looking at a strategic plan to advance broadband capability and access for the community. What we're proposing is that we look at an opportunity similar to Centennial to provide a backbone infrastructure that will cover the northern part of Palm Desert, what we're calling unofficially the University District, the downtown retail area, which is our core commercial area, and of course, the southern part of our city, and also have an opportunity to cover the entire city. But in terms of a backbone, these are the three main areas that we're sort of focusing on as an opportunity. And as was mentioned before, well, I'm not sure if it's mentioned before, but really we have a unique opportunity to partner with CVAG, right? Coachella Valley Association of Governments, who's really at a critical point now that they're deploying their own infrastructure in the form of fiber to connect the entire, call it region, their signalization for the entire region. And this is an opportunity that they're looking at a phase 2 project that would allow us to cover a majority of the city in terms of additional conduit and fiber to reach the majority part of our city. And so we're proposing is that we continue to collaborate with CVAG and co-locate fiber where it's already going to be dug up, where they're going to be digging up our streets, our arterials, and our main areas. And then from there, provide an opportunity to build out the future of broadband for the entire city. And really, that's the three key points here is, right, to look at strategically where to co-locate with CVAG's project. And we'll show you a slide here of what that looks like. And then, of course, look at an opportunity to master plan the entire city as well. So next slide. So if you focus in the middle part of this map, that is the Palm Desert area in the purple. You'll see a blue line that runs down the middle of Highway 111, and maybe Wayne can point to the 111 corridor there, and then the I-10 corridor at the very top. The 111 corridor is currently a project that CVAG is doing. They're interconnecting all of the signals across the entire valley. We don't have an opportunity to tie into that project, but we do have an opportunity to tie into where the additional purple or magenta lines are that run north and south, and then east and west in Palm Desert. And the benefit of this is that you have an opportunity to basically reduce the cost of what is the most expensive part, is to trench and to dig and tear up streets where CVAG is going to be doing it already. And so we have an opportunity to lay our own infrastructure conduit that would be independent of their system, that we have control. And like Tim mentioned, that would stir up and hopefully attract, an opportunity for us to partner with third-party providers. And we would, in the interim, between now and the time we lay conduit, we would reach out to those providers and really say, if we build it, will you come? And really that's the drive behind this. And so you see the green areas there of how the backbone could be set up, similar to Centennial. And then we would cover independently, or a additional phase, South Palm Desert, that would include Highway 74, the downtown core, maybe a wraparound back through Mesa View, and then back down Portola to tie in back into the 111 corridor. Again, this is just essential backbone infrastructure that then the third-party vendors could come in and invest their own infrastructure to bring fiber to the homes, to businesses, and to other areas. And so you'll see the northern loop, what we call, could be co-located with CVAG's project. And then we would simultaneously look at programming and planning for a southern loop as well. So I know that's a lot of information. We'll finish up with a couple more slides, and then we can open it up for questions. Go ahead, next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Wayne. He can briefly go over some of the potential funding sources.
Thanks, Martin. Can everybody hear me? Okay. This is a fairly typical cast of characters that we would be looking at to secure funding. You've got federal, state, and local funds entering this space, the broadband space. I thought I'd take just a very short minute to highlight some of the funds that staff is looking into and working on figuring out whether we can secure some funds from those resources. So in the federal level, we've got federal infrastructure, the federal infrastructure bill, and that is still drafting, so we don't know what exactly would be included in that. However, there is separate in the American Rescue Plan, there is a separate $10 billion set aside specifically for broadband implementation across the nation under what they call the Capital Project Funding Program, and that's run out of the Treasury. Treasury is going to be issuing notification of funding this summer. Staff is tracking that and understanding what exactly those funds can be used for. To date, it's been understood that that will be a very wide-ranging pocket of money or pot of money to be able to use. It won't be based just necessarily on underserved or underutilized markets. It will be broadly interpreted and possibly able to be broadly used. At the state level, there's $7 billion in the current legislative budget. And I was just on a Digital Divide call today where the Southern California Government Association of Governments is looking at specifying $4 billion for Southern California specifically. Again, these funds are separate from the federal funds. This would be a state pot of money from which we could pull. Again, these are developing as the legislation moves forward for that. And then of course, there's always a local source, that hits our pocketbook more locally. It competes with our CIP plan and it can be expensive relative to the other resources. I did want to say, however, with the local funding, you have the greatest control. And as you go up the chain, the food chain, you tend to lose less and less control as you get closer to those federal dollars. CVAG, there was a question in the subcommittee meeting about CVAG funding for phase 2. They are using Measure A funds and CMAQ funds, which are separate from the funds that you see before us and likely separate funds than what we would use or look at using going forward. Martine, I'll toss it back to you.
Thanks, Wayne. All right, so this is probably one of the last slides that we have. Actually, I think it is. Where do we go from here? What are we proposing? What are we asking the council to consider? We really like to recommend for us to continue engaging with CVAG to evaluate the implementation of a collaborative project that would allow us to lay critical infrastructure along with their interconnected signalization project. And that's the map that we showed you earlier that showed the north and south and east and west connections that they're going to be moving forward with in perhaps the summer of 2022. We'd like to come back to the council in August to give you a full report of what potentially financial impact this would be on the city if we were to move forward with this plan to enhance or to basically collaborate with CVAG. And then we'd also want to come back to you and request for us to move forward with a master plan for the entire city. So there's sort of two tracks, right? The existing collaboration with CVAG to lay the critical infrastructure that would eventually be part of the master plan, but it's moving fairly quickly and we want to tie into that opportunity if possible. And then again, obviously coming back to you and finalizing, the master plan, the routing, estimated costs, funding sources, and really check in with you and say, is this something the council wants to move forward with and invest in? If that's a go in later this fall, again, we would finalize an agreement with CVAG for allow us to provide a bid alternate in their project to allow for us to provide our own separate conduit and fiber in agreed upon locations. And again, as I mentioned, come back and continue on with the master planning for the entire city that would encompass South Palm Desert, East Palm Desert. I mean, I don't want to go into the locations, but it would encompass the entire city. So I think that wraps up our presentation. Wayne, is that correct? Okay, perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So at this time, we'd like to open it up to questions, feedback, and discussion. I'll turn it back to the mayor.
Martine, could you go back to the slide that showed the CVAG project? I'll get us started with a quick question while others are forming their question, and show the bright green overlay that we're thinking of. You talked about creating a backbone for the whole city. Why would we not include these eastward spurs on Fred Waring and I guess it's Country Club, since it's so much cheaper to do that while the drench is open? Because that's a big chunk of the city over there to the east.
Absolutely. That's really something that we could definitely include. I mean, obviously, we're trying to focus in on key areas of economic development, but certainly, if you're absolutely right, if we're trenching once, we should look at the opportunity to overlay those areas along Fred Waring, Country Club, and other areas that are already going to be trenched. So that's a good point. Thank you for that.
Mayor Pro Tem Harnick.
Thank you. And along those same lines, we have the CVEP building, the IHub that has the Scenic fiber coming up through there. Doesn't it make sense then to have some sort of tie-in coming from there? And I know there has been some discussion at a higher level about because the Scenic fiber goes throughout the state, finding ways that it can be used in other ways other than just colleges. And whether that happens or not, that remains to be seen. But it does make sense, I would believe, over on Cook, next to those campuses and next to what could be, certainly there's a lot of undeveloped land, and there is the Scenic fiber that's already over there. So could we consider that as well?
Absolutely. As you know, the Scenic line provides high-speed broadband to the universities across the state, and that's certainly what we've tied into at the IHub. We could look in opportunities to collaborate. I'm not sure how much access we could have to that line because of the sort of institutional, educational requirements. But luckily, we were able to do that with the IHub, having the Cal State co-locate with us.
And so currently they are quite covetous of their fiber, but because what we have seen through COVID and the really great need we have for broadband for all reasons and all needs throughout our area, there is some discussion. We'll see what happens with it, but it's something I'll keep my ears open to, and if I hear anything, I certainly would let you know.
Councilmember Nastande.
Yes, I have a couple of questions, and could we go back to the map again that Mayor Kelly asked for? And okay, so I'm trying to read. So where we see purple, that's where CVAG is currently doing broadband. Is that what you were saying? Wherever there's purple?
Where you see purple, and then maybe Wayne can highlight the central part of the map, which is Palm Desert. So where you see the underlying purple areas is phase 2 of their interconnected signalization project. And so they will be installing conduit and fiber for the signalization project. And we're asking for consideration to co-locate in these areas.
And then Mayor Kelly mentioned the East area and Country Club. So where is that again on the map? I know I kind of have an idea, but you're saying there's nothing planned for that area because it looks like there's purple there already that we could tie into as well.
That's the point. Put the bright green up. The point I was making is that CVAG intends to dig there. CVAG intends to dig on Country Club and Fred Waring going to the east. but at least the draft backbone that staff had up didn't capitalize on that. So the question I was raising is, shouldn't we capitalize on those spurs on Country Club and Fred Waring while the drench is open?
Correct. And that would save us money ultimately, correct, Martine?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then my other question is, when like we're talking about getting federal dollars, but we'll lose local control. And is there anything specific that would concern you about, quote, local control that the federal government might do that we wouldn't? Because it would be good to get a big pot of money. So that's a question I would have. What would be different if we used federal money?
And I can try to answer that, and maybe Tim or Wayne can also add to this. But from what little I know, once we include dollars from federal or state entities, we lose a little bit of a control. If we're looking at an opportunity to lease, for instance, lease out the fiber to a third-party provider or a vendor, I don't know if there's restrictions from federal or state dollars that would prevent us from leasing out our infrastructure. And so that's a good question that we should investigate, but look into. That's why we say local control. We can completely can monetize this investment and perhaps bring a return for the community and for the investment. So Tim and Wayne, I don't know if you have any additional comments to that.
Yeah, I can add just a couple of lines. So I think unfortunately the reality is the chances of getting federal dollars are going to be pretty slim. Most of the federal dollars are really geared towards areas that are defined as unserved and underserved. And although you technically are kind of underserved, so are all those other hundreds of sort of mid-sized cities that I was talking about that have these sort of cozy duopolies. So it will be a stretch. It's not impossible, and the rules are changing. And as they finalize some of the rules, unfortunately, the lobbyists are increasing their activities. So again, those same sort of cable providers that, you know, have spent so much money in your community investing in their infrastructure really don't want to see competitive fiber networks built, you know, with federal funding. So it's something to watch. It's something to evaluate. The reality is, for me, it's definitely in the 20% bucket at best.
Okay, so we really can't rely on it, basically. But thank you,
Mayor Pro Tem Harnick.
Thank you. And let me just say thank you for all this information, because this map is great and it really helps us understand it so much better. And Tim, what you're saying about the unserved and the underserved communities, that expression comes up over and over in the digital divide conversation that we hear. And certainly we have some communities that easily fit in that description. And the fiber, I would think, and this is, you know, my less informed, certainly, view, has to go through the Coachella Valley anyway. So are there ways that as it goes down to those communities that are easily defined as and underserved, would we be able to perhaps pull off of that? And that was one. Two is, wherever CBAG does the trenching, that's the most expensive part of this project. So comparatively, putting in through conduit or fiber should go wherever they've already done the difficult and expensive work, I would think. And I know I had a third, but I forgot it. So when I remember it, I'll chime right in again.
Well, we'll go to Councilmember Jonathan, who's experimenting with different hands to get my attention.
Thank you. I think I need a different background. There's no hand that stands out on my screen. I apologize.
Can we get to a red drape or something?
I'll work on it. So first of all, Martine, congratulations to you and your team. And Tim, thanks for hopping on board. Not only for a really super presentation, and I know I'm repeating myself because it was similar to what the subcommittee saw, but just great presentation. And more importantly, I'm so happy that you have jumped on this opportunity it's a slam dunk, no brainer. I mean, we have a chance to get free trenching. Let's, obviously let's do it. My caution is we missed the boat, nobody's fault for Highway 111. So let's make sure that we move quickly enough not to miss any further windows of opportunity. Here's my question. So, Martine, you mentioned a master plan for broadband, and it occurs to me that we have several infrastructure projects under consideration. Broadband certainly being one of them. Undergrounding is raising its head again. The bike path, CV link extensions and so forth, and maybe there are others that I'm not thinking of. So I would not want to hold up broadband, but I wonder if it's appropriate to look at the bigger picture. And as we look at a master plan, look at a master infrastructure plan that incorporates some of these other items as well. And the reason I'm asking it is because, Martine, you also mentioned financial impact and ways to fund this. We understand that the federal funds, like what else is new? We're not going to get them, or state funds for that matter. So as we look at other funding sources for really large scale projects, and I would include all of our infrastructure projects in this, I'm not suggesting that we move forward with this, but I'd like an understanding of what a project specific temporary increase in sales tax and or TOT would do in terms of making these large scale infrastructure projects feasible. Can we incorporate some kind of information about that as an alternative for financing, not just broadband? And I'm talking, all of the broadband throughout the city, the total package, the backbone for the entire city, but also potentially, and I know it's a guess as to the amount, but undergrounding, CV link connectors, bike paths, and so forth. Is it possible to incorporate that discussion into your analysis?
It certainly is. I think all these critical components come into play. As you mentioned, there are a lot of projects out there that we're still considering. And those are how we integrate those projects into the master plan. It's the number one policy that I've seen come out of these plans. It's the dig once only policy, right? So if we're tearing up a street, whether it's overlaying, repaving, or a new infrastructure project, that's the number one opportunity you have to do that. So, but from a financial standpoint, what return? That's something we can. And I don't know if Tim has any experience from that standpoint, but I'd ask to see if he could elaborate on sort of how other cities or entities have kind of approached the fiscal analysis or financial analysis.
I think funding's nearly a whole sort of separate category, but I think one of the things that was brought up, certainly undergrounding, the coordination of undergrounding with your electric utility and putting in infrastructure, as was maybe mentioned earlier, is a bit of a no-brainer. Boulder, just as an example, another project I'm working on, the city of Boulder, they did certificates of participation to fund their backbone infrastructure. I don't know if that's something you do in California. So they did certificate of participation for $20 million. Net was 19.8, and that probably will only cost them 13 total because the bids were so good. So that's just a recent example. Centennial was different. They funded it out of their general fund. So yeah, it's sort of one of those things that sort of depends, and obviously until we get further along the line with CVAG and dialogue and try to understand what their idea of cost sharing might look like, it's kind of hard to know what number or start point even is, right? I think that's really what needs to maybe determine first.
Great. Gina, is your hand up again or just didn't take it down?
Well, I just learned after a whole year of Zoom how to put it up. So now you want me to learn how to put it down? So
just go back to the same place and it will let you do that. Mayor Pro Tem Harnick.
I know there's so much pressure, right, Gina? A couple of things. I want to remind everybody that when we did the general plan update, we said that whenever we significantly dug on any of our streets and did any construction, that we would be putting conduit down for future fiber. And really it was to address the digital divide. So that was in our general plan update. The other thing, and it sounds, Wayne, like you possibly were on the digital divide call today.
I was.
Okay, so they're looking at somewhere around 8 billion, that's with a B, dollars, half from Fed, half from state, to address all of Southern California. Now, whether this happens or not, we all know it may not. But, you know, fiber is one of those things. It's not that it's going to go around some area, it's got to go through. So I think, you know, with what we're seeing here and the information that Tim's giving us, I think we have some great opportunities perhaps to pull off of these other networks that are being talked about at this time.
And I could give it a little, I think I'm thinking back to your previous question too, which I know I didn't answer, is so the key piece to think about is the fiber that's missing in most of America is what we call sort of the local fiber or the metro fiber. So the fiber that's really within your community, whether you're in a city or even in a regional area. A lot of the interconnecting points already exists. So what's going to happen with a lot of this new funding is, although, as you say, there's a need to run past Palm Desert, a lot of that fiber is in the ground. The carriers own it. The carriers are very happy to lease it and sell their products. So the federal funding is actually going to compensate some communities to buy from the carriers those transport capacity along the long haul routes. And again, the emphasis will be on that sort of local metro fiber infrastructure. So that makes it harder sometimes to, as you say, sort of share in the deal of somebody else, because all his money, all his focus is on his regional area. It's not necessarily on the A to B of how to get to his area, if that makes sense. So unfortunately, these carriers, you know, not only do they win in the market competitively, now they're probably going to be community subsidized to buy from them too. So.
All right.
Thank you for that information.
I don't see additional hands. Oh, excuse me, Councilmember Quintanilla.
I was waiting for questions to be addressed first, and the questions that I had were addressed by the other members of the council. And saying again, why dig twice? We have to take advantage and capitalize on the collaboration. And just wanted to advocate that it is absolutely imperative for the region, just wanting to acknowledge that without having the future of education secured, not only there, but then to support all of the students throughout the city and those that pursue distance learning opportunities outside of the Valley, that this is critical for growth strategic. We have so many people that are turning to online-based businesses and things moving out of their home, and we advocate over and over. So this is, in my opinion, something that we wholeheartedly need to support. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That was a perfect wrap up. And I think staff all join in Sappy's expression of gratitude and great pleasure at how informative this has been and how much clarity it has accomplished. And I think the feedback clearly encourages staff to stay on the timetable that you proposed, with the added work we gave you to consider coordination with other projects and funding options. So we look forward to the next chapter. And council members, I think we have a distinct link for closed session. In your ample free time, be sure to check your email, because there is an updated memo pertaining to item 6 on our open session agenda. So everybody needs to be sure to see that before we get to open session. But see you in closed session in a jiffy.
Thank you.